Okay, Amanda, we're so excited to welcome you to the Student Lens today. So today we're going to talk about some of the teaching practices that Dr. Madeline Schell, who's your social psychology and research design instructor, has used to engage you and other students in online class discussions. How's that sound?
Sounds good, Julie.
Perfect. So let's begin by talking about some of the asynchronous discussions. How did Dr. Schell motivate you to participate and engage with your peers?
Okay, so the first class that I had with Dr. Schell was asynchronous online. And one of the first things that stood out to me, one is that she set the deadline for the initial prompt to be in the middle of the week to make sure that people like me don't wait until Sunday to put my initial post and a reply. So it's a little bit more of a discussion because everybody's had a chance to have their first thoughts first and then, reply to it as well. And then one thing that I noticed on our first discussion post is this, as soon as we posted, Dr. Schell went in and responded to every single person before anybody else even had a chance to. So it just started that conversation and the dialogue. And a lot of times with discussions, you'll just do the two or whatever is required. But just seeing her set the example made it more like, oh, if there's a third one that I want to respond to, it's okay for me to do that as well. So that was the first thing that I noticed.
That's awesome. So she immediately demonstrated her presence in the course. And it sounds like you were actively engaged. Were you talking to peers in the discussion as well? Can you tell me a little bit about how you responded to peers? Did you get feedback from peers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the main things is having that first one happening in the middle of the week made it so that people come back later on instead of getting everything done at once. And so there was a lot more where we would ask a question and then that person would actually respond, which I don't always see that in the classes. Like if I'm asking a question, nobody ever comes back and checks what the replies are, but it was more of a dialogue and a conversation whenever it was set up that way.
That's awesome. So it sounded like an actual conversation where you're gaining things from your peers and co-constructing knowledge together. That's great. And something else that you mentioned was a Q&A forum, right? Where students could post questions, answer one another. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And why was that helpful to your learning and engagement in the course?
Yeah, so this was something I can't recall exactly how many times throughout the semester, but it was at least 4 times. It was set into different sections. There was one discussion post that was just for questions and answers. And we had, if we posted a question in there, we had an opportunity to get a bonus point, basically. So it encouraged people to do it right off the bat from the beginning. And so with that, I found that if I post a question and another student, the way that it worked is Dr. Schell at the end of the period would create a live video that anybody could join, but it's also recorded if you can't make it. But since there was a gap in there between whenever your question was answered, other students would hop in and put in their their opinions and what they think it might be, or if it was something that we were studying for our final project, they would hop in and give their insight of the different research papers that they've been reading. So.
That's awesome. And something else I think you mentioned was making some of the discussions lighthearted in the beginning of the semester, so you felt comfortable engaging and it felt personalized. Was that something else you wanted to share a bit about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, I don't know, a lot of times at the beginning of the semester, you're filling out what the discussions are supposed to be about, like how many times are you supposed to cite something and should it be formal and instead of an actual conversation, and having felt like icebreaker questions as part of the discussions in the beginning made it feel, I guess, more like a sense of community rather than, a serious assignment that we're turning in, even though it is like it's all part of our learning and things like that. But it made us feel a little bit more comfortable talking with each other and even responding if we didn't know 100% that we were right. It's just talking about our opinions, and it really felt like a discussion rather than an assignment because of that.
Well, that's awesome. It does sound like it was really personalized and you really got to engage and tap into some of your own expertise and interests. So let's pivot a bit now and talk about the synchronous discussions. So you shared a little bit about how Dr. Schell engages the class, right from the start by using an icebreaker question or launching into a poll? What's the difference between starting a class like that versus, say, taking attendance?
Well, I think for sure from a student perspective, it's I don't know, it gets you involved right away. So it's so easy, especially in an online synchronous class, to log in and then start checking your email or working on an assignment or something like that. And so right at the beginning, and she logs in a few minutes early so we can start that discussion early. You know, I'm always the person that logs in early to make sure I'm not late. And so we can start engaging with that. But then we also see, I don't know, what our classmates are responding as well. So it makes it feel like it's not just the teacher that's in, or the professor that's in the classroom, it's all of us.
That's awesome. And we at AQ call that an engagement trigger, that you start with something interesting, right? So that it's not just people on their phones or pulling up different browsers. So that's a great practice. And let's talk a little bit too about the breakout room. So you mentioned that Dr. Shell usually gives groups a clear task for the breakout rooms and then also circulates between rooms. So tell us a bit about how she structures the breakout rooms to make sure that they're most effective for you and the other students.
Okay, good. So we use breakout rooms like once or twice a week. So we meet twice a week. And one of them is usually for a group project. We're working on our final, it's a research design class. So we're working on our final projects together in a group. But then also on the other days, she mixes it up so that we're meeting with other people in the class. So it's not always the same people. And so a lot of times it'll be with the content that we're learning about. So we'll have a series of different prompts that we have to look at, and we have to just identify what's the variable or what's the construct being measured in this. And is it being observed or is it being measured? Is it being manipulated? What is going on here? So we're just applying what we're learning in the classroom and talking through it. And so with that, it's really helpful because in online classes, what I feel like I miss out personally is that like natural discourse, being able to talk with people and seeing other people's point of view. And even in, online discussions, it's not always happening that way as well, just because it's not a conversation, as much of a conversation. And so that's something that I really like, is to see why people are thinking it might be a certain thing and others are thinking this other way. So we're just really exploring the principles a little bit more deeply.
That's great. And you also mentioned that she circulates between the groups too. So she pops into your breakout room.
Yeah, absolutely. So she's told us that she can see our comments in the chat anytime we're typing them to each other. So that's one way for her to see like what's going on from the outside. And if we ever need her, we could just pop it in chat and for her to come in. But in addition to that, she hops around. So every time we're in there, she's in there at least once. If it's something that we're struggling with as a group, she'll even come multiple times. So that's something so that we're not just left there being off task or whatever it is. But the timing is really great because it always feels like as soon as we're done, we're coming back. And so there's not usually where we're being off task or anything like that.
And then when you come back to the session, do you debrief as well? Do you share a little bit about what your groups talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. So she'll, because there are multiple discussion prompts, she'll ask people from group 1 to talk about prompt number 1, group 2 to talk about prompt number 2. Or sometimes she'll even do a round robin where everybody says, especially whenever it was new, she would do that a lot more, where each group would talk about what they got for each one.
Awesome. And so just to summarize a bit for our learners, how do all these different discussion strategies impact your learning and your engagement in the course? Because what I'm hearing, right, is that she's really involved. She demonstrates her presence, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous. You're really getting to engage with your other classmates. How does all of this impact your learning and engagement?
Well, I mean, for one, because she's so involved, it makes me more involved as well. So sometimes if I have an online class where the professor isn't quite as engaged, those are the deadlines that I'll keep pushing my work until closer to the deadline, and I don't have as much time to learn something, like noodle it around for a little bit or think about it throughout the week. It's more, let me get it all done and then do it. But since there's a lot more discussion happening, I'm a lot more accountable to doing the work throughout the week instead of waiting until the last minute to do it. But I feel like I understand the topics a lot more whenever I have a chance to engage in that conversation with people. And not only that, but if there is something that I don't understand that I wasn't aware of that I didn't understand, it brings it to light because we're engaging with it. I don't know if you've ever like taken a test where you're like, wow, I thought I knew this, and apparently I have no clue what I'm doing here. It kind of prevents that from happening.
So it seems like it's getting you to higher levels of thinking as well, right? Being able to bounce ideas off your peers, uncover what you may not know and thought you knew. So that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your perspective about discussions in Dr. Shell's class. So appreciative that you took the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you, Julie.